Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take a stack of your sources and really pull out those crucial nuggets of knowledge and insight, specifically for you. Today, we're doing something a bit different, a unique kind of deep dive. We're not, digging into a research paper or a historical event. Instead, we've got this incredibly detailed blueprint. It's a plan for an educational experience. Our mission today is to go behind the scenes, really, to unpack the plan for an English learning deep dive, specifically one called Inside the Navy Submarine, Learn English Quickly with podcast episode 6. So it's a deep dive into how you make a deep dive, focusing on the mechanics of, learning a language, all through this really captivating topic.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here, I think, is just how layered the source material is. It's not just, fact about submarines. It's actually a meticulously designed teaching framework, a pedagogical structure. And if we look closely at that, it lets us explore not just the subject submarines, but the actual architecture of effective learning, especially for English fluency. And this blueprint, it kind of implicitly raises a big question, doesn't it? With so many language resources out there, what makes this approach potentially stand out for you, the learner? What are the little design choices that might genuinely speed up how you learn?
Exactly. That's precisely what we're getting into today. We're going to pull back the curtain on how this conceptual English Fluency Pod deep dive is structured. We'll look at the specific, really rich content about life and work inside a Navy sub that it aims to deliver. And maybe most importantly, those innovative teaching features, the ones designed specifically to help you, the listener, not just understand English, but truly learn it and speak it. Think of it like a behind-the-scenes look at a really engaging language lesson. We'll be looking at keywords like Navy submarine, English fluency, shadowing practice, daily routines, but not just as vocabulary lists. We'll see them as core points of this really thoughtful educational design. It's about dissecting a method that claims to make learning easy, natural, and fun, and figuring out, how they actually plan to do that. Okay, so let's really dig into this foundational idea. The source starts with this welcome message for the English Fluency Pod. It promises a podcast that makes learning English easy, natural, and fun. Now that sounds nice, but it's more than just marketing, right? It feels like a mission statement. What does this tell us about the core philosophy behind the whole series? What kind of learning vibe are they trying to create right from the get-go?
Oh, that opening statement is absolutely crucial. It immediately sets up a very learner-centric approach. It puts your experience and your, psychological state first, ahead of just memorizing rules or doing grammar drills. When it says easy, it's not really implying it's, effortless. It means accessible. It wants to minimize that intimidation factor that often stops people when they start learning a language. So breaking down complex stuff into smaller, manageable chunks, reducing what psychologists call cognitive load, basically, the mental effort needed to process new info. Less friction at the start makes you feel more capable, right, than natural. That suggests an intuitive process, almost like immersion. It mirrors how we pick up our first language through context, exposure, repetition, rather than just abstract rules, moving away from textbook English towards, how people actually talk. And fun, that hits the nail on the head for maybe the biggest hurdle in language learning, keeping motivated, staying engaged over time. I mean, let's be honest, learning a language can feel like a grind sometimes, but framing it as fun turns it into something enjoyable, maybe even like a game. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this philosophy gets that learning a language isn't just about thinking, it's deeply emotional, it's experiential. When you genuinely enjoy the process, you're way more likely to stick with it through the tough parts, sure, but also to get that deeper, more ingrained fluency. It's about making the journey itself rewarding.
It's a really good point. Easy, meaning accessible, not simple. And the title for this specific deep dive, Inside the Navy Submarines, that also clearly signals a fascinating journey. It's not called Submarine Vocab Lesson 1. It's positioned as an adventure. How does that specific framing play into the fun and natural aspects you were just talking about?
That framing, it's a masterstroke in engagement, really. Instead of just a dry lesson, it's pitched as an adventure, a fascinating journey. That immediately taps into our natural curiosity. I mean, a submarine. It's inherently mysterious, isn't it? Confined, full of specialized roles, secret tech. Using a topic like that, something unique and often kind of hidden, it just draws you in. Imagine yourself as the listener, picturing being on board, exploring those tight spaces, meeting the crew, maybe hearing the hum of the engines or the ping of the sonar in your head. That narrative hook makes learning feel less like study, less like a chore, and more like you're actively exploring something cool. And this strategic choice, it also brings up a really key point. How does this specific subject, submarines, naturally lend itself to rich vocabulary and realistic dialogue? Why is it such a good vehicle for learning English? Well, a submarine environment is incredibly structured. It's full of concrete things. Nouns like periscope, galley, torpedo rooms, specific actions verbs like dive, surface, patrol, defined roles, captain, engineer, cook. All this concrete, contextual language naturally creates scenarios for practical common language functions. Giving instructions, asking for permission, reporting problems, even just making small talk under pressure. The goal stated for you, the learner, is crystal clear. Explore the submarine's rooms, daily routines, and crew life while improving your English step by step. It lays out both the exciting content and the methodical step-by-step learning method. That transparency helps manage your expectations and gives you a clear roadmap. It reinforces that easy, natural, and fun doesn't mean shallow. It means very thoughtfully designed.
Right, I can see the genius in that structure. Now let's step inside the blueprint itself. The very first content section is labeled Introduction and Context. It starts with the basics. What is a submarine? Then it covers the purpose of Navy submarines and where they operate, oceans, depths, missions. Why start there? Why is this initial context so important for an English learner, especially before getting into the details of life on board or the technical parts? Why not just jump straight to, say, the engine room?
Well, this initial part provides absolutely essential groundwork. It creates what educators sometimes call a cognitive scaffold for you. Imagine trying to understand, a complex machine without knowing its basic function or where it's used. It'd be incredibly confusing. So before driving into the specifics of submarine life or its complex tech, getting that broad understanding of the subject creates a solid mental framework. It's really like building the map before you start exploring the actual place. Having that initial clarity significantly cuts down on the cognitive load, that mental effort we talked about, especially when new, possibly tricky vocabulary comes up later, because you already understand the why and where behind these new terms. For instance, if you know a sub operates deep underwater for surveillance missions, then words like sonar or periscope make immediate sense when they're introduced later. They have a place to live in your mind already. It directly tackles your initial curiosity, answers those basic questions, and systematically sets a logical stage for the detailed tour that comes next. Without that context, all the later info might just feel like random jargon, making it way harder to understand and probably more frustrating to learn.
Okay, that makes sense. And right there at the beginning, the blueprint mentions a vocabulary preview with slow pronunciation and repetition. This sounds like a really key support technique, not just for the intro, but maybe for the whole thing. What's the sort of hidden power in previewing vocabulary like that, nice and slow?
The power there is actually quite profound. Pre-teaching key words in this controlled, repetitive way effectively primes you for what's coming. It's not just passive exposure, it's active, conscious preparation. By introducing terms like submarine, depths, mission, or crew, slowly, clearly, and then having you repeat them right away, the plan lets you build confidence with these new sounds and words before you meet them in faster speech or more complex sentences. This lowers anxiety, a huge barrier in language learning, and it frees up your mental energy during the main parts of the lesson. So instead of getting bogged down trying to figure out how to say a word or what it means, you can focus more on understanding the overall message. It's a really proactive strategy for picking up vocabulary and also for developing what's called phonological awareness, your ability to hear and work with the sounds of the language. It lays down a solid linguistic and listening foundation, setting you up for success right from the start.
That makes perfect sense. So once that broad context is established, the blueprint shifts focus. It dedicates a good chunk of time to life inside a submarine, covering things like living quarters and sleeping arrangements, food and meals on board, work schedules and crew shifts, and even communication inside the submarine. This part clearly moves from the general sort of external view of the sub to the very personal, relatable human experience inside it. What's the teaching benefit of making that shift?
What's really fascinating there is the deliberate focus on universal human stuff things everyone does, but set in this extraordinary environment. Eating, sleeping, working, talking. These are themes that resonate with all of us, but here they're infused with the unique challenges and quirks of submarine life. This allows for introducing really relatable vocabulary and common phrases that are grounded in everyday activities, making the learning feel much more real and memorable. For example, talking about eating on a sub might bring in words like galley or mess hall. They're specific to the setting but tied to the universal act of having a meal. And including dialogue examples early on, like asking where a place is on the submarine or small talk between crew members, directly targets practical conversational English. It immediately pushes you beyond just listening passively. You get these repeat with me phrases for fluency, prompting you, the listener, to actually try saying them, mimicking the pronunciation and rhythm. Imagine practicing saying, "Where's the galley?" or "How was your shift?" It makes the language feel much more accessible, less abstract. It personalizes the learning journey, connecting new words to experiences you can actually imagine and, importantly, potentially use in your own life, even if you're not on a submarine.
Right. So after getting a feel for the human side of things, the blueprint makes another smart turn. It transitions to submarine parts and functions. This is where it details areas like the control room, command center, engine room, torpedo room, sonar and navigation systems, and periscope use. Now we're getting into the more specialized words, the technical terms. Why this specific order? Why not introduce the tech stuff earlier on?
Well, that logical progression is really key to delivering the content effectively and, crucially, avoiding overwhelming you, the learner. Once you have a sense of the daily life, the routines, the human element, you're kind of conceptually ready, maybe even curious about the more technical bits of the submarine itself. It's a bit like first understanding the people living in a house, their daily rhythms, and then once you've got that foundation, you start exploring the house's structure, the plumbing, the electrics. Each part, the blueprint says, is explained in slow, clear English with key vocabulary and example sentences. This ensures these often complex technical terms are brought in systematically with context. For instance, explaining the control room might involve a sentence like, "The control room is where the captain steers the submarine and manages its operations." That context makes the specialized word meaningful, and it reduces the mental load of just memorizing isolated words. This section also highlights a really powerful technique: shadowing practice for technical terms. And this brings up an important question for you, the listener. How does actively mimicking these terms help you master tricky new words and pronunciation, especially when they might be long or unfamiliar? Well, shadowing directly tackles the precision needed for specialized language. By immediately copying the pronunciation, the intonation, the rhythm of these new terms, you don't just practice saying them right, you powerfully reinforce how they sound. That active vocalization helps cement the new words in your memory, moving them from just recognizing them passively to being able to actively produce them. That's absolutely vital for using technical language confidently and naturally later on. It's the difference between knowing of a word and being able to truly use it.
I see that built up, yeah. Then, after breaking down the physical parts, the next section covers daily routines at sea. Things like morning announcements, training drills, maintenance checks, and watch duty shifts. This seems to bring structure and order to the parts in the human interactions we've already explored. It feels like this section is designed to kind of integrate the human and the technical aspects.
That's a really sharp observation. This section gives crucial opportunities for language related to procedures, instructions, reporting, all very functional, very practical language skills. In that confined, high-stakes environment of a submarine, this kind of communication is absolutely essential for safety and just getting things done efficiently. Think about morning announcements. That's a realistic context for understanding formal instructions or schedules. Or maintenance checks, perfect for understanding how to describe problems or give technical status updates. The blueprint includes dialogue practice for giving instructions, reporting problems, asking for permission. These target those real-world communication situations directly. For example, a dialogue might have a crew member reporting an issue, maybe something like, "The sonar system is showing an anomaly, Captain," or another asking permission to enter the engine room, Chief. It's all about empowering you, the learner, to use English in practical, goal-focused situations right there in the submarine context, moving you from just understanding to actively using language for specific reasons. It reinforces that powerful idea that language is a tool for doing things, not just describing them. It gives you a functional toolkit of useful phrases.
Okay, so from those structured routines, we then logically move to Navy submarine missions. Things like patrol in the ocean, search and rescue, surveillance missions, training exercises. This definitely broadens the scope, looking at the submarine's purpose and how it interacts with the wider world. It brings us back to that initial context, but now with a lot more depth.
Exactly. This section pushes the thematic vocabulary out even further. It introduces terms relevant to strategy, operations, emergency situations, maybe even the geopolitical side of things. Words like patrolling, surveillance, rescue, or exercise, they gain specific, rich meaning within this operational setting. The blueprint mentions using vocabulary in context plus repetition drills here. That reinforces learning in different situations. So the word patrolling might appear in a sentence like, The submarine is currently patrolling the designated area near the coastline for extended periods. You see it, you hear it in action, which helps solidify its meaning through multiple natural exposures. And the listening comprehension mini quiz provides that immediate low-stakes feedback. It lets you check your own understanding of the spoken language related to these missions. That active recall and self-check is essential for what's called metacognitive awareness, where you start to understand not just what you know, but how well you know it and what you still need to work on. It makes your learning way more efficient and targeted. The nugget here is that immediate, low-stakes feedback like a quiz doesn't just test you. It actively makes learning better by forcing you to retrieve information and showing you where the gaps are. That makes your next practice session much more effective.
Right, that makes sense. And finally, the blueprint doesn't gloss over the tough parts. It details submarine challenges like space limitations, limited fresh air and light, staying healthy and fit, and crucially, crew cooperation and teamwork. This adds a really important layer of realism, doesn't it? It gives a more complete and frankly more relatable picture, even though the setting is so unique.
Oh, absolutely. This section is vital for two big reasons. First, yes, it adds that much-needed depth and realism. It acknowledges the real difficulties, the unique conditions of living crammed into a sub. It stops the whole thing from seeming too easy or idealized. That realism makes it way more engaging, more believable. Second, and maybe even more crucial for language learning, it provides a natural and compelling context for talking about problems, solutions, teamwork. These all require essential communication skills that go way beyond just submarines. Think about the language you need to discuss space limitations. Phrases like, it's pretty cramped in here, or we have to optimize every inch, or there's not much personal privacy. These are incredibly useful phrases in many contexts, and the blueprint includes a role-play conversation, problem solving with a teammate, offering and asking for help. This lets you, the learner, practice that collaborative language in a simulated, maybe slightly stressful environment. So one person might say, I'm having trouble with this piece of equipment, can you give me a hand? And the other might respond, sure, what's the issue? Let's figure it out. This encourages more complex, more nuanced interactions. It builds not just vocabulary, but also what linguists call pragmatic competence, knowing how to use language effectively and appropriately in real social situations. It really tests and develops your ability to say what you need, offer help, negotiate solutions, build rapport. This is where language truly comes alive as a tool for connection and action.
Okay, so we've walked through the journey of the content itself. Now let's shift gears and look at the learning engine, the mechanics of how this deep dive teaches. The blueprint lists several really powerful techniques like repeat with me, after key phrases and shadowing practice for vocabulary and sentences. How do these techniques, which might seem simple on the surface, actively build fluency, going beyond just passive understanding?
Right, they might seem simple, but they are absolutely cornerstone techniques for developing both pronunciation and intonation. And, maybe even more importantly, for building automaticity in speech. That's the ability to speak without having to consciously think about every single word or grammar rule. Repeat with me builds immediate recall and confidence. You hear a phrase, there's a pause provided in the blueprint, and then you immediately say it out loud. This fires up your auditory memory and your mouth muscles at the same time, creating a strong connection in your brain. That immediate vocalization helps lock the new language in. Shadowing then takes it a crucial step further. Shadowing is about mimicking the natural rhythm, the stress patterns, the intonation while the native speaker is talking or immediately after with almost no delay. This helps you internalize the music of English, making your own speech sound more natural, less, robotic. It also massively improves your listening comprehension because you become really tuned in to the subtle things native speakers do, like contractions, linking sounds between words, reducing sounds. And those deliberate pauses for listener repetition, they aren't just dead air. They're strategically placed moments giving you the processing time and the physical space you need to actively engage. They ensure you're doing much more than just passively listening. You're actively participating and making the language happen.
And the emphasis on dialogue role plays in slow, clear English. That seems clearly aimed at building confidence for real-time conversation. How does practicing specific functional language, like giving instructions, reporting problems, asking for permission, translate to more general conversational fluency, beyond just talking about submarines?
That's a fantastic question because this is exactly where this specific practice becomes universally useful. Role plays act as that vital bridge between understanding the theory of the language and actually using it spontaneously in practice. By practicing common exchanges in a safe, controlled environment, you internalize speech patterns and appropriate ways to respond without that fear of making mistakes that can sometimes freeze you up in a real conversation. And these aren't just random dialogues. The blueprint shows they're carefully built around common, practical language functions, giving instructions, reporting problems, asking permission. Think about how often we actually use these functions in everyday life, whatever the topic. Instructing a colleague, reporting an internet issue, asking to leave a meeting early. By mastering them in the submarine context, like press this button to activate the sonar, that's an instruction, or the periscope isn't extending properly, reporting a problem, or may I access the control panel, asking permission. You, the learner, develop skills you can transfer anywhere. You learn how to structure those sentences, use the right words, respond naturally. It builds essential communication muscle memory, making these crucial language functions more automatic, more accessible in any future chat, not just ones about subs. It's about building a solid framework for real-life interaction.
It's really clear how much thought went into that progression. The blueprint also mentions a gradual increase in speaking speed and regular listening comprehension checks. From a teaching perspective, how do these elements contribute to the overall learning curve? How do they make sure learners are actually moving forward, not just stuck in the same place?
That gradual increase in speed is absolutely key for building natural fluency and adaptability. You start with comfortable, clear pronunciation and speed. That makes sure you understand initially and it's less intimidating. Then, through later repetitions and different sections, you gradually adapt to a more native-like speed. This systematic increase trains your ear to process faster speech and your mouth to articulate more quickly, basically mimicking how native speakers actually talk. It's kind of like a runner starting with a slow jog, then picking up to a steady pace, and finally doing a sprint. You need each stage to build up speed and endurance. And the listening comprehension checks, like that mini quiz on missions we talked about, they provide vital, immediate feedback. They make sure that you're not just echoing sounds or memorizing phrases, but that you're genuinely understanding the meaning of what's being said. This quick feedback loop lets you spot gaps in your understanding and maybe go back over tricky parts, making your learning incredibly efficient. It encourages active listening, which is fundamental to learning any language, and helps you self-correct and fine-tune your understanding as you go. The insight here is that learning isn't just about taking information in, it's about that cycle of input, practice, and getting immediate, low-stakes feedback on how you're doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also noticed the blueprint highlights using storytelling for memory retention and realistic but easy-to-follow examples. That's a really interesting choice for language learning. How does using a narrative help you learn language in a way that just, say, listing vocabulary or grammar rules doesn't? What makes a story such a powerful tool?
Stories provide this incredibly cohesive and engaging context. They make vocabulary and grammar way more memorable than just isolated words or abstract rules ever could. Our brains are just naturally wired for narrative, aren't they? We remember sequences of events, characters, problems, solutions much better than disconnected facts. By embedding the new language within a full submarine story, like the blueprint describes for a later section, those new words and phrases stop being just abstract ideas. They become part of a vivid, connected mental picture. For example, instead of just defining the word buoyancy, a story might describe how the sub adjusted its buoyancy to rise towards the surface. That makes the word's meaning concrete, tied to an action, part of a memorable event. Stories tap into our natural human tendency to remember narratives, anchoring the new language in a relatable, often emotionally resonant framework. Plus, using realistic but easy-to-follow examples ensures the language you learn feels authentic and is directly usable. It stops you from sounding, unnatural or like you swallowed a textbook. The examples are carefully designed to mirror real-world use but still be understandable for the learner. They bridge that tricky gap between classroom English and how people actually talk. This authenticity builds real confidence that the English you're learning is genuinely useful and you can actually use it effectively in real life. The surprising nugget here might be that our brains process stories differently than just data points. Language learned through narrative kind of bypasses purely cognitive processing and taps into deeper, more associative memory networks. That makes recalling it much faster and more intuitive.
That's a powerful difference. And speaking of intuitive learning, there's that dedicated section on vocabulary without translation. The plan is to teach words using English-only explanations and context sentences from submarine life. Now, for many learners, that no translation approach might feel a bit challenging at first. So why is this method seen as so effective for getting truly fluent in the long run, even if it takes a bit more mental effort up front?
Yeah, it can feel challenging, but it's a truly sophisticated teaching choice. It's a deliberate step away from just finding the equivalent word in your own language. By explaining words directly in English, using simpler English words, synonyms, or descriptive phrases, it forces you, the learner, to actually think in English. This process builds direct, immediate links between the new word and its meaning within English itself, rather than relying on translation as a cognitive crutch. For instance, instead of translating galley, it might be explained as the kitchen on a ship or submarine where food is prepared. That active processing encourages true immersion. It builds what linguists call a strong mental lexicon, where English words are linked directly to concepts, not indirectly through your first language. This is absolutely vital for speaking and understanding, automatically doing it quickly and effortlessly. And the repetition drills at slow, medium, and fast pace within that section then reinforce this direct understanding at different speeds, building that automaticity. This multi-speed practice trains your brain to recognize and produce the word quickly, smoothly, much like a native speaker would. It really paves the way for spontaneous, natural fluency. It might be a short-form challenge, but it's definitely for long-term gain.
The deep immersion does sound incredibly effective. Lastly, the narration style itself. It's described as friendly, engaging, and slow enough for non-native learners. It also emphasizes encourage active participation by asking questions and give learners confidence by repeating phrases multiple times. This sounds like a very supportive, almost personal learning environment, which seems maybe different from some more formal, traditional ways of teaching.
Oh, a supportive and encouraging tone is, honestly, paramount in language learning. No exaggeration. The friendly and engaging narration keeps you motivated. It builds a positive emotional connection to the learning itself, makes the whole thing feel less like a lecture and more like a chat with a helpful guide. Being slow enough for non-native learners is critical at first for understanding without getting overwhelmed. It gives you that crucial processing time for new info, new sounds, before speeding up later. Actively encouraging active participation by asking questions, even rhetorical ones like, can you imagine sleeping in such a tiny space? It prompts active thinking, internal rehearsal. It stops you from just passively listening, makes you part of it. And crucially, giving learners confidence by repeating phrases multiple times that significantly lowers performance anxiety. It signals that it's okay to stumble, that repetition is expected and valued. It reinforces the idea that progress comes from consistent practice, not from being perfect instantly. This whole approach ensures that you, the learner, feel supported, challenged just enough, and ultimately successful. That fosters real motivation to keep learning. The key insight here is that confidence isn't just something that happens after you learn, it's vital fuel that drives more learning.
Wow, what a meticulously designed learning journey. It seems like it all comes together in the shadowing and fluency section. This features a full submarine story read slowly. Then you, the listener, repeat after each sentence. Then there's a second reading at normal speed, and finally, a final reading with natural intonation and rhythm. This feels like a really powerful way to wrap everything up, to synthesize all the elements introduced earlier. How does this multi-stage approach pull all the prior learning together?
It absolutely is the ultimate practice for integration, for really cementing fluency. It strategically takes all those separate bits, the vocabulary, the grammar points, the communication functions you learned earlier, and expertly weaves them into one cohesive, meaningful story. The full submarine narrative. This gives you a natural, immersive context to apply everything you've absorbed. And that multi-stage repetition starting slow, the normal speed, the natural intonation, it methodically trains both your listening skills and your speaking skills. The full submarine story reads slowly, lets you focus on initial understanding, getting the pronunciation right, repeating accurately, builds confidence. Then, the second reading at normal speed deliberately pushes you to pick up the pace, mimicking real-time conversation, training your mouth muscles for faster delivery. Finally, that final reading with natural intonation and rhythm hones your ability to sound more like a native speaker, not just word by word, but in the overall flow, the music, the natural stress patterns of English. This systematic progression really pushes you towards authentic, fluent delivery. It's a complete cycle. Listen, understand, produce accurately, produce naturally. It ensures the material isn't just passively understood, but can be actively, confidently used in spoken English. It's really the moment where all the pieces click together into a fluid whole.
And finally, the deep dive wraps up with a final review and motivation section. This includes a recap key submarine vocabulary and expressions, and motivational tips for learning English daily. It also explicitly invites listeners to practice shadowing again tomorrow. This clearly aims to build a habit of learning that goes beyond just this one session. What makes this final part so crucial for long-term learning and keeping people engaged?
This concluding segment is absolutely crucial. For knowledge retention, yes, but maybe even more importantly, for keeping you engaged over the long haul. Recapping the key vocabulary and expressions directly fights against the forgetting curve, right? It reinforces what you learned just when it might start to fade, helps move it into long-term memory. But it's not just about the content. It's about building a lifestyle of continuous learning. Those motivational tips for learning English daily encourage consistency, which is the absolute foundation of learning a language. Learning a language isn't a one-time thing. It's not just one deep dive. It's an ongoing daily process. By giving practical tips, the podcast empowers you to fit English practice into your everyday life, making it a habit you can sustain. That specific invitation to practice shadowing again tomorrow fosters that continuous learning habit. It turns a single learning experience into part of a sustainable journey. And the closing message, this was episode 6 of English Fluency Pod. Keep listening, keep learning, and keep speaking English every day. That's such a powerful, concise call to action. It reinforces the ongoing nature of getting fluent, gives encouragement, and provides a clear instruction for continuing. It ensures you carry that momentum forward well after the audio stops. The real nugget here, I think, is that the true test of a great learning experience isn't just what you learn in the moment, but how it changes your habits for continued growth long after. #, outro.
What an incredible blueprint. Really, just meticulously crafted for a learning experience. Our deep dive into this English Fluency Pod plan for the Submarine episode, it's really revealed the thoughtful, multi-layered design that goes into truly effective language education. It's just a testament, isn't it, to how combining fascinating content with strategic research-backed teaching methods can genuinely transform learning. Turn it from a chore into something captivating, something you actually enjoy. It's not just about what you learn, but how you're guided and how that whole process feels.
Exactly. This analysis really highlights that effective teaching is so much more than just presenting facts or lists of words. It's about crafting an immersive, interactive experience. It underlines the profound importance of clear, progressive structure, of active participation, things like shadowing and role play, and that continuous supportive reinforcement. If we connect this to the bigger picture, education generally, it demonstrates that truly impactful learning happens when you, the learner, are actively engaged, when you feel supported, and when you're continuously encouraged to push your boundaries just a little bit, building confidence step by step instead of feeling overwhelmed.
So what does all this mean for you, the listener, as you tackle your own learning goals? Well, perhaps it's a powerful reminder that really mastering something complex, whether it's a language, a new skill, a dense subject, often involves breaking it down, breaking it into manageable, engaging pieces, practicing actively with some structure, embracing those small challenges, and always keeping sight of the bigger, exciting picture of how you can actually use that knowledge. It's about finding the adventure in the learning itself.
And this does bring up a really intriguing question, doesn't it? Something to think about for the future. What other complex, maybe niche worlds, much like the intricate environment of a Navy submarine, could serve as equally ideal, equally captivating settings for deep dives into language learning? And what might designing those kinds of learning experiences reveal about the fascinating, often hidden links between specialized knowledge and the universal art of just human communication?